Coming up on Network Africa. All 79 children kidnapped from the Presbyterian Secondary School in Bamenda, Cameroon, regained their freedom. Citizens in Madagascar cast their ballots in the presidential elections. The United Nations says thousands of children soldiers dragged into South Sudan's civil war are unlikely to be freed soon. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shubowale. We begin in Cameroon, where all 79 children kidnapped from the Presbyterian Secondary School in Bamenda have regained their freedom. The students were among the 82 people kidnapped in the early hours of Monday in the restive Anglophone region. However, the school's principal and a teacher are still in captivity. The government and separatists in the English-speaking region have been accusing each other of being behind the kidnapping. Meanwhile, the head of the Presbyterian Church in Cameroon, Reverend Funke Samuel, says he is not concerned with who was behind the kidnapping, but just overwhelmed and happy that the children are back. Also, a ban on people moving around in the Mizam division, brought in after the students were taken, has been lifted. Let's bring in security expert David Otto to discuss more on this story. He joins us live from London via Skype. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The quick release of these students brings to mind the manner in which the Nigerian Dapchi schoolgirls were taken and released. What do you make of the rather quick release of the students in Cameroon?
Of course, this is good news for the release of these students. But of course, the question still remains as to which particular group actually took them, because the so-called Ambazonia separatist restoration forces that are operating within that particular area in the northwest region of Cameroon, they are accusing the government security forces of actually kidnapping the children. And what they are saying is their forces have been able to release those children rescue those children, to use the better word, from the government security forces. But on the other hand, the government is saying that the Ambazonian forces were responsible for the kidnap. The question which a lot of people are asking is, most of the schools that operate within those areas, especially in the northern region and the southwest regions, they are being manned by security forces from the government. And the question remains is, how come they were able to take these girls or these students without any gunshots from the military, without any kind of a struggle? So it is still open as to what really transpired. It is all about the battle of hearts and minds. You know, the government is trying to win the propaganda of trust from the population. And the Ambazonians are also trying to win the hearts and minds of the Cameroonians and the people in the diaspora.
Like you said, the government and separatists in the English-speaking region, they have been pointing the fingers at each other. Many are of the opinion that this kidnapping was staged by the government to taint the English-speaking region. How accurate could this be?
Again, the question is, if the Ambazonian forces actually have the kind of capacity that would be required to take those kind of students. I mean, they are not as powerful as the case was in Dapchi, where Boko Haram had that kind of logistics, to carry out that kind of a massive kidnap. The Ambazonian forces don't really have that kind of capacity to do that at the moment. So the question is, how were they able to do that if it was the Ambazonian forces? But again, the question goes to the military forces that are in that area, because were they able to give the kind of security that the students require? Because the whole issue has been on making sure students are back in school. And the government has actually promised that it would provide security to ensure that students are safe in school. So if that was not the case, then it still remains a question for the military to answer how the Ambazonians were able to take the students, in their presence.
The main question now is how can the government prevent a reoccurrence of this type of kidnapping from happening again?
One of the biggest problems that the government has is, again, winning the hearts and minds of the people. There's a lot of people that believe in the Ambazonia crisis because of the issues of marginalization. Of course, the president took oath of office yesterday, and he swore that he would look into the crisis and try and resolve some of the underlying causes. That is the only way that the government can stop people from carrying out this kind of kidnaps. But again, nobody knows who really did this, whether this was just a propaganda by the government forces or some people or some other group that just wants to discredit the whole narrative of the Ambazonia crisis. But, it's a difficult scenario. The only way to stop it is for the government to really sit down and have a negotiated settlement for a way forward in the crisis that is ongoing in the northwest and southwest regions.
Now, David, is it possible for Boko Haram militants to take advantage of the fight between the government and the Anglophone separatists to stage this kind of abduction that we've seen in Chibok and Dapchi in Cameroon?
Of course, every chaotic environment brings opportunities for insurgency groups. Boko Haram, for example, would take advantage of any instability in Cameroon. And we're not just talking about Boko Haram here. We're talking about the Biafra crisis, which hasn't still disappeared. I mean, although the leadership is nowhere to be found. But this kind of what is going on in the northwest and southwest regions will create more instability, and it will stretch government security forces that are already stretched with the crisis in the northeast, fighting Boko Haram, in the west, fighting the forces from Central Africa. The Cameroonian government does not have enough resources to continue this kind of crisis now. They need to resolve the problem in the southwest and the northwest region. If they don't resolve that, again, it comes to your point. Groups like Boko Haram, will simply take advantage and launch a massive attack because they would find a space which, whoever kidnapped these children found, to kidnap them.
David, it's evident that Cameroons are still divided. 80% is the French-speaking region, 20% is the English-speaking region. The Anglophone region complain of discrimination. How can this issue be resolved?
The only way that the government can resolve this issue is to bring together the people that have a dog in the fight. There are so many influences coming from the diaspora. They have so many different groups. The interim government, the ADF, they're just scattered all over the place. The way that the government can resolve this is not just by, giving a word of mouth service, and say we would resolve it. It is to bring together all the parties of this Anglophone and of these English-speaking regions, bring them together to look into whether the issue of decentralization, federalism, or separation, or restoration, as they call it, is something which is possible. But, if the crisis is left the way it is, it would affect not just Nigeria, but it would affect Central Africa and West African region. They need to bring these guys on the table. Using the military force will never, ever solve the problem because the people believe that they have been discriminated against, and they will fight to their death to make sure that they get something positive in this current crisis.
Security expert David Otto, thank you for speaking to us on Network Africa. Moving on now, here in Nigeria, the Prince of Wales has arrived in the nation's commercial capital in Lagos. The plane conveying the royal visitor touched down at the presidential wing of the Murtala Mohammed International Airport at about 12:13 p.m. They were received by the Deputy Governor of the Lagos State, Aderanti Adebule, and the Commissioner of Police in the state, Adgal Imohimi, among other personalities. Shortly after he departed for the naval dockyard on Hamadu Bello Way, Victoria Victoria Island, where Prince Charles is expected to be honoured by the Nigerian Navy. According to our correspondent, Gimba Umar, who was covering the visit, Prince Charles boarded the Nigerian Navy ship a while ago. Prince Charles and his wife arrived in the nation's capital yesterday and undertook a series of engagements, including a meeting with President Muhammadu Buhari and some traditional rulers in the country. Millions of voters in Madagascar have come out to cast their ballots in the presidential election as the Indian Ocean island struggles to create jobs, fight poverty and end corruption. Queues started forming as early as 6 a.m. in the capital. EU election observers say the election is going smoothly. If no candidate gets more than 50% of the vote, there will be a second round between two top candidates on December 19.
Citizens in Madagascar head to the voting booth, hoping that the winner of the island nation's presidential election can deliver stable jobs in a country shackled by poverty.
I am grateful for elections as we get to choose and change the leadership to whomever we want to lead.
Though official statistics say unemployment is under 2%, a government study in 2015 found so-called disguised unemployment was at least 20% and underemployment was rampant. In the run-up to the poll, the three frontrunners, all wealthy men, have toured the country making ambitious promises, hiring helicopters to sidestep the problem of run-down roads, handing out sacks of rice and T-shirts. There are 36 candidates on the ballot, but only 2 can advance to a runoff on December the 19th. Madagascar's incumbent President Harry cast his ballot in the island's nation's capital, Antananarivo. He is surrounded by a crowd of his supporters as he arrived at the polling station and urged voters to maintain peace. Each has pledged to accelerate recovery for the economy. The International Monetary Fund forecasts growth at more than 5% this year in a decade.
Opposition leaders in the Democratic Republic of Congo are planning to meet in Geneva on Thursday to choose a joint candidate for the December 23rd presidential election. Leading opposition figure Felix Tshisekedi will take part in the meeting, which is expected to last 3 days. Mr. Tshisekedi has emerged as the front-runner to clinch the opposition ticket after former Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba and Moise Katumbi, the former governor of the mineral-rich Katanga province, were ruled out as candidates by election officials. President Joseph Kabila, who has ruled the country since 2011, will not take part in the election. His refusal to step down 2 years ago when his mandate ended sparked violence in the country. The ruling People's Party for Reconstruction and Democracy has chosen Emmanuel Ramazani Shadri, a hardline former minister and loyalist to Mr. Kabila, as its candidate. The United Nations says thousands of child soldiers dragged into South Sudan's civil war are unlikely to be freed soon because aid agencies lack the funds to look after them. The UN envoy for children in armed conflicts, Virginia Gamba, who spoke to former child soldiers in the country, said a lack of resources to reintegrate the children mean they remained at extremely high level of abuse. The government signed a peace deal with rebel factions in September to end a civil war that killed at least 50,000 people. But many children who were forced into the conflict are still stuck in military camps in the bush. Since January, 900 child soldiers have been freed, and Gamba says she expects a further 1,000 releases by the end of the year. Still to come on the program. South Africa's golfing legend Gary Player is nurturing local talents for the big fields. Please stay with us.